Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. And today I want to talk to you about how I study as a medical student and what techniques have worked for me and maybe a few that haven't. To start off with, I want to explain that in medical school, studying was a lot different than when I was an undergraduate degree, because in your undergraduate degree in high school, they are teaching you a concept and they're building that mental map in your brain for it. Whereas in medical school, they're giving you a lot of content at once and it's too much for one mental map. So they give you this content and then it's up to you to consolidate it and make it work in your brain. So I'm often finding I have to find a way to map it into my brain so it can live in a certain spot. And sometimes for each unit, that often means several different maps. That can be tricky when you're not used to doing this, and I struggled at the start with how to study in medical school, and over this year I have gotten much better and found various techniques that work for me and keep me motivated to keep learning the content and learn it at the depth and breadth that they need us to. There are 3 types of studying that I make sure that I do when preparing for unit exams and to keep that knowledge in my brain for clinical experiences. The first is lecture content, the second is a way to summarize it for my brain, and the third is a way to test myself. There's various ways to do each of those, and I'm going to show you what works for me. Starting off, I use an app called CollaNote because I can write directly on my iPad using this app, and it offers a lot of features that are helpful for me to follow along in lecture and keep my notes organized. So starting off, I will upload the PDF of lecture slides into the app, and then while attending lecture, I will go through and add handwritten notes as needed, but trying not to overload it so that I'm still listening to the content being offered. It's important that this step is done well. If you do this half as good, then you're also only going to get half as good in your studies, because this is where you're studying off of, so you got to base all your knowledge and make a strong base for it. Once I'm done making my notes in lecture, I go to the top of my slide deck and then I can add a sticker. I like this sticker function because it helps me keep in order what I've completed with this lecture, and also it's a bit of a reward of I did this. That is my way of recognizing it to myself. So I add this sticker, and then my next piece is I need a way to consolidate that information, summarize it for my own brain, and lectures can have up to maybe even 60 slides for 1 hour. With that, my brain cannot memorize 60 slides, but it can memorize and learn one summary sheet that I've made. Using the split screen function in the CollaNote app, I pull up my lecture slides and I pull up a new note where I can then create a summary sheet of that lecture and then add to it as we have more lectures on the same content. I make them very visual. I was a bullet journaler, so that's really important to note that this did not come overnight, but just starting with writing it down, if it doesn't look pretty, that's okay. If you want to look pretty, you can do that later. You can work on that as you get this skill down pat, but just make a way for you to remember what you learned and summarize it so that the key pieces all make sense as you put them together. I also really like using the sticker function in CollaNote to make them pretty in an easy and fast way. Then, after doing this step, I will also make flashcards. Again, I like using just the same app for all of it. Using the split screen function, I can make flashcards directly in CollaNote that I can write on myself. Now, the flashcards, you can pick your template and then handwrite the question side and then the answer side. I often like to put the lecture slide that came from on that flashcard so that then I have a way of mentally mapping it back to that lecture if I'm still unsure of that piece of content. I also use tags for each of the flashcards as a way to keep them organized, because then when you go to starting a new study session, you can select which tags you want to have included in that study session. So I can pick to only study from week 1 or just genetics info, rather than all the flashcards I've made at once. And this keeps it nice and organized and gives me a great way to study. In CollaNote, it uses a spaced repetition method as well, similar to other systems, where you can press whether that was a hard, easy question, or remembered. If you put easy, it's going to show it to you, I think, about 3 more times till it marks it remembered. Put remembered, it's not going to show it to you again in that session. And if you put hard, it's definitely going to show it to you again. That's all that I use on my iPad for studying. There are other ways that I also will do pen to paper, and that's crafts. I'm a very crafty, artistic person, and I really enjoy finding ways to incorporate that into my studying because it keeps me motivated to keep it going. An easy craft to start off with is handmade flashcards. It can be easy to get carried away with flashcards and make too many, trying to cover all the content at once. That makes it also really hard to then go use those flashcards because you got a stack of 60 of them for one lecture, and it's unrealistic that you can then do that for 30 lectures. What I've done is I use a half printed and then half written element, and I use this for medical terminology and conditions. Like gastroparesis here, we had a lecture where that concept was covered in about 10 slides. And so I summarized those 10 slides on the back of the key information I need to know about gastroparesis. This gives me a way to study it and test myself, along with a really easy way to remember what all those elements of the condition are. On a condition card, I like to write what the condition is, its symptoms, how it's diagnosed, the treatment options, and some of the causes. I then will do that, and I can color code all of my cue cards based on their lecture. I sometimes run out of paper colors, so it's not exactly a perfect system, but it really works to make it so I keep green and green together, and then my brain will remember maybe the color more so than the exact content when I'm forming that map, and then the next time I study it, it'll start to remember the content. On my flashcards, I also like to use a visual format, such as x-rays. When they show us x-rays in class and we have to identify what we're looking at, it's an easier way to put that on, print it off, put it on a flashcard, write it out by hand on the other side what you're looking at, and this will help for recalling it in a test when you see it, and then also when I'm in clinic and they ask me questions about an x-ray that I'm seeing, I will know, oh yeah, I remember seeing that in this one lecture, and I remember my flashcard showed this. I think this is what I'm looking at. That kind of mental pathway is then formed. A second type of craft that I like to do is very super visual, and it's summarizing each lecture with a cute visual summary of it. This was our fungi lecture, and I really loved this one because I was able to, I drew this out by hand, cut it out, and then used white pen on black, which is just such a gloriously pretty technique, and able to write exactly what we learned about fungi in that lecture. This is less of a condition base, and this is more of a concept and a category that you want to learn. So here we have the cell, and I was able to put important things we need to know about the cell. I use this little drawing to tell me what the tests are to find fungi in the human body, and then also different types that they wanted us to learn, and the differences between yeast and mold, and then what happens when you have one that turns from one to the other in different temperatures, such as the human body. This also made a cute way of testing myself as well, and this was very fun to make. I try not to be too much of a perfectionist and just let it go with the flow. Some of them turn out really nice like this, and some of them turn out a little bit messier, like my parasites one. It's all over the place, but it also works because on the other side, I have all the information about each parasite. The main thing was that I had a way of remembering it in my brain, and visually it made me summarize it as well. I make these especially when I'm the least motivated to study, because nothing is more motivating than something you're interested in, and for me, that's being creative and crafts. For you, that could be something else. Just find that thing that's important to you, and make it work for motivating your studies. My third visual way of crafting is those summary sheets I showed on CollaNote. I also have made them on pen and paper with my highlighters and different colors, because sometimes that is also more appealing than using the app. I have moved more to the app, but these are some of the things I did when we learned about hematology. This was the first lecture, anemia, and then every lecture I made a summary sheet of it, and then I just taped them all together so it made a really nice book. This was a great way to summarize information at a bit of a quicker pace and give myself something very tangible that I had in my hands when I need to study, and I don't always have my computer on me, so having it in your hands is handy. With CollaNote, I also will print off my summary sheets to have them on hand as well, because you never know when you're going to be having a little bit of extra time to study and you just don't have your computer or it's not charged with you. I will give a quick note of some techniques that I tried and why they did not work for me. I tried doing online flashcards. That did not work for me because typing does not bring it into my brain. But it's a great resource that some people find super helpful. So one of those is Anki. I use pre-made Anki decks as a way to test my knowledge and use someone else's words to test my knowledge, because that's very similar to how a test at the end of a unit is going to be done. But when I make my own Anki decks, I don't really remember it because, again, typing doesn't help me. Hence why I do visual flashcards. Another technique I used very early on was I tried to just rewatch lectures on 2x speed, and I did that for multiple lectures multiple times. I learned that that did nothing for me because I needed a way to consolidate that information in my brain. I thought, well, if I've seen it 3 times, I'll just be able to recall it. Turns out, wasn't able to. And our student affairs actually did a really great session with us where they had us draw out a nickel from scratch. They just said, take a piece of paper, now draw out a nickel, you have a minute. And then we got to see a nickel and we had to score it on how many detailed elements we got from it. I did terribly, and it really did show that even though it's something we see every day, when you're asked to then bring that information and write it down, we can't easily recall it, even though you'd assume, yes, I do know what that looks like. So that gave me a great indication of ways I need to study and how I need to be able to write it out and do recall and not just recognition as well. Everyone's study techniques are going to be different. These are what have worked for me in my first year of medical school, and I'm sure that's going to change as I go into second year, and especially when you go into your third and fourth year and you're in clerkship, you're in the hospital, you're doing more direct patient encounters, you're applying the things you have learned in class. It's going to really change how you study that content as well and prepare for each day in clinic. These are what have worked for me so far, and as I build on those skills, I want to bring you along with me on that journey, and I will keep sharing what has worked.